Well, to talk more about this, we're now joined by British scholar and analyst Dr H A Hellyer, who's with the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Mr Hellyer, thanks very much for joining us this evening. If we could start with your reaction to this declaration by the Israeli Defense Forces that it's stepping up its ground activity in Gaza and what this might mean.
Good evening. Gaza's a place where you don't have, unlike what you just saw from your correspondent in Jerusalem, any foreign press. There's little to no access for aid groups. And now, as of 8 p.m. tonight, close to zero communication with the outside world. So I think that's really important for you to put in the framing of what's going on right now. The United Nations has already alerted us to the fact that we're now down to 12 trucks going into Gaza, when before the outbreak of hostilities at this level, there were more than 450, because that's what was needed just to satisfy basic needs. And we're seeing a complete collapse of the Strip because food isn't allowed in, water is not allowed in, fuel is not allowed in. And now we can't even assess the effects of this escalation in violence and a further Israeli incursion into Gaza. What we do know is that just before the cut in communication, that particular moment coincided with what people who had sat phones on the ground said was some of the heaviest bombardment yet. So now the destruction, the bombardment, it's going to happen in the dark, except for the lights that shine from the bombs that are going off and targeting not simply Hamas. I think this is very important for your viewers to know that this is one of the most densely populated areas in the world, which means that civilians are going to bear the brunt of the consequences of this. And to me, that's extremely dangerous, not simply for the people of Gaza, but for the region, that there's a real danger now of regionalization of this conflict, which would be catastrophic. The UN Secretary General earlier today said that everyone must assume their responsibilities, that this is a moment of truth, and that history is judging us all. And I think that's very right.
We heard earlier today a moment of hope, perhaps, with reports, unconfirmed, admittedly, that negotiations were progressing on a ceasefire. Does Israel's declaration this evening put an end to that?
We did see these reports. The reports that I saw, which came from, I believe, Israeli television, or an Israeli analyst on Israeli television, indicated that there had been suggestions of several days of ceasefire, at least some sort of humanitarian pause. It's not clear what happened to those negotiations. The Qataris have been saying for several days now that they saw potential for a breakthrough. I do think that the current escalation puts that on the back foot. I also don't think that this is the complete escalation. I think that what we're seeing right now, and of course we'll know more tomorrow if people are able to communicate, I think this is an escalation, but I think that there are going to be different levels that escalation can take. So this may not be the worst that is yet to come. And again, this is incredibly dangerous. Any escalation whatsoever is dangerous, not simply for the lives of the hostages, and I'm glad that that's being paid attention to, but we're talking here about 2.2 million people, most of whom have nothing to do with Hamas, are civilians, half of whom are young people and children, according to the United Nations. I think we need to be very focused on what that means for them.
Of course, we're definitely keeping a very close eye on what's going on in terms of the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Just to touch on what you mentioned, the hostage situation. Now, if this is indeed not the full-scale military operation that we are hearing about, that Israel is talking about, if it's only a slight increase, might this still have ramifications for the hostage situation?
I think if there's going to be any movement on the release of hostages, that there needs to be a ceasefire. There needs to be a humanitarian pause. When you see this sort of escalation, I think it makes any suggestion of mediation in order to release hostages and bring them out safely very moot. And again, the United Nations General Assembly just, I think about half an hour, 45 minutes ago, released their own General Assembly resolution, 2/3 of the General Assembly, the vast majority of the world's nations, calling for a humanitarian pause. And this was rejected by Israel and the United States and very few others. And I think this is also very telling. The majority of the world's nations is calling for a de-escalation here. And in accordance with what multilateral organizations and the United Nations have been calling for quite consistently for quite some time now. It is falling on deaf ears, unfortunately. And I think we need to be very clear about that. This escalation is extremely dangerous. It's already bringing about tremendous risk. And it's important that it end in order to avoid any further regionalization of the conflict, which would be catastrophic for everybody involved.
Okay, very good to get your insight there. Dr. H A Hellyer with the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Thanks for your time this evening.